If you went to the Bronx Zoo in New York, USA in 1906, you undoubtedly would have found yourself at the exhibit of Ota Benga, a man kidnapped from his home in Africa and displayed in a cage along with an orangutan. People threw him food, poked at him, taunted him, applauded when he did something they liked. Although he was only on display in the Bronx for 20 days, Benga longed to go home to see his wife and kids again. Tragically, Benga's fate was already etched in stone by his masters. In this video, we will tell you about the heartbreaking story of Ota Benga, a man who did no wrong being caged in a zoo and displayed like an animal and subjected to the worst form of humiliation of any human being. A man torn from his home, his wife and children. It's a story that shows how cruel people can be to each other and how important it is to treat everyone with kindness and respect, no matter where they come from or what they look like. Also, as a way of supporting our efforts, hit the like button of the video, share and subscribe to help the channel grow. Your support means a lot to us. Ota Benga's story depicting a black man being kept in a zoo is tragic, but it was not unique. In the 20th century, human zoos were a thing. Until 1958, people from non-European cultures were forcibly taken from their homelands and displayed in human zoos, where they were treated like animals. With a belief of white superiority, Europeans and Americans felt that blacks were never human and treated them as an inferior race that needed guidance from the whites to get civilized. It was during the 19th century, with the creation of race and the European and American colonization of Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, when human zoos became a terrible display of inhumanity and cruelty. Human zoos became an expression of the toxic racism that ran through European and American society. It provided a justification not just for colonization abroad, but also for Jim Crow and segregation in the United States and apartheid in South Africa. In America, the treatment of black people like animals was common towards the end of the slave trade. Former mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut, P.T. Barnum, kept a blind and almost completely paralyzed enslaved black woman named Joyce Heth. He had claimed was 161 years old, and when she died in 1836, Barnum sold tickets so people could watch her body be taken apart and viewed at a public autopsy. Over 1,500 tickets were sold to that event and contributed to the idea that black bodies were different and animalistic. The first full-scale exhibitions of black people were found in Germany in the 1870s, and due to their popularity quickly spread all over Europe and into the United States. The World Fair in Paris in 1889 brought the Eiffel Tower to the world, but it also had on display the Negro Village, which featured over 400 people captured during France's colonial exploitations in Africa. In 1904, the World's Fair in St. Louis had an even larger collection of humans from all over the world. There was even an event at the fair called the Savage Olympics Exhibition, in which people were forced to engage in their primitive activities while hundreds of people gawked. The science of race was created in the 19th century in order to justify slavery and colonization. Scientists proclaimed that there was a human hierarchy, and people with darker complexions were placed at the bottom of this hierarchy. A Harvard professor of zoology proclaimed in 1873 that black people were a subhuman species that were a degraded and degenerate race that were not of the same blood as we are. The categorization of humans into different races was used to support social Darwinism and the white man's burden that was popular at the time. This belief fueled the idea that white people were superior, and because of their superiority, it was the burden of the white man to teach civilization to our little brown brothers, as President William Howard Taft used to describe Filipinos. This became the primary justification behind the colonization of the Philippines and Hawaii. As a result, human zoos became a staple in American and European societies well into the 20th century, and even beyond World War II. One of the early proponents of putting people in zoos, or ethnographic displays, as they were known then, was Samuel P. Verner, a minister from South Carolina and self-proclaimed explorer. It was Verner who had taken to the habit of physically kidnapping people in Africa and bringing them to the United States to rent out or sell to zoos. The exhibit at the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904 had many African people supplied by Verner. Verner cloaked his money-making enterprise in religion, as he was a minister and missionary. Giving these primitive people a taste of civilization was his justification. Verner took advantage of the complete exploitation of the Congo region by the Belgians in order to capture and bring to America dozens of people who would then be placed on display. Ota Benga was one of those people. As a member of the Mbuti people, Ota Benga lived in equatorial forests near the Kasai River, in what was then the Congo Free State. His people were attacked by the Force Publique, established by King Leopold, the King of Belgium, as a militia to oppress the local people and communities, most of whom were used as forced laborers in the extraction and exploitation of Congo's massive supply of rubber. Benga's wife and 2 children were slaughtered. He survived because he was on a hunting expedition when the Force Publique attacked his village. He was later captured by slave traders from the enemy Bachelel or Bashilele tribe. Benga was Mbuti, who were commonly referred to as pygmies in the West. How Werner came to acquire Benga is not well known, as Werner's story changed many times. Most likely, Ota Benga was purchased from human traffickers. Benga was then brought to the United States and forever separated from his home. He was housed in the pygmy display at the St. Louis Fair, along with other people taken from Africa by Werner. The Louisiana Purchase Exposition had already begun, and the Africans immediately became the center of attention. Benga was particularly popular, and his name was reported variously by the press as Artiba, Autobank, Otabang, and Ota Benga. He had an amiable personality, and visitors were eager to see his teeth that had been filed to sharp points in his early youth as ritual decoration. The Africans learned to charge for photographs and performances. One newspaper account promoted Benga as the only genuine African cannibal in America, and claimed that his teeth were worth the 5 cents he charges for showing them to visitors. Benga accompanied Werner when he returned the other Africans to the Congo. He briefly lived amongst the Batwa while continuing to accompany Werner on his African adventures. He would marry a Batwa woman who later died of snakebite, but little is known of this second marriage. Not feeling that he belonged with the Batwa, Benga chose to return with Werner to the United States. Werner later took Benga to the Bronx Zoo in 1906. William Hornaday, director of the zoo, initially enlisted Benga to help maintain the animal habitats. However, Hornaday saw that people took more notice of Benga than the animals at the zoo, and he eventually created an exhibition to feature Benga. In 1906, he was then displayed under a sign that said "Missing Link," a derogatory term used to discuss the evolution of humans, indicating that Benga was much closer to being an animal than he was to being human. By the end of September, more than 220,000 people had visited the zoo, twice as many as the same month 1 year earlier. Nearly all of them headed directly to the primate house to see Ota Benga. His captivity garnered national and global headlines, most of them inured to his plight. For the black American clergymen in the USA at the time, the sight of one of their own housed with monkeys was startling evidence that in the eyes of their fellow Americans, their lives didn't matter. A report would read, "Bushman shares a cage with Bronze Park apes," further adding to his plight. On a Monday afternoon, a small group of ministers led by the Reverend James H. Gordon, then hailed by the Brooklyn Eagle as one of the most eloquent Negroes in the country, boarded a train to the Zoological Gardens, better known as the Bronx Zoo. At the gleaming white Beaux Arts-style primate house, they spotted Ota Benga ambling within a cage in the company of Duah, the orangutan. The minister's attempts to communicate with Ota Benga failed, but his palpable sadness and the sign stoked their indignation. "We are frank enough to say we do not like this exhibition of one of our own race with the monkeys," Gordon fumed. "Our race, we think, is depressed enough without exhibiting one of us with apes. We think we are worthy of being considered human beings, with souls." William Temple Hornaday, the zoo's founding director and curator, defended the exhibition on the grounds of science. "I am giving the exhibition purely as an ethnological exhibit," he said. The display, he insisted, was in keeping with the practice of human exhibitions of Africans in Europe, breezily evoking the continent's indisputable status as the world's paragon of culture and civilization. Unrepentant, Hornaday declared that the show would go on just as the sign said, each afternoon during September, or until he was ordered to stop it by the Zoological Society. But Hornaday was not some rogue operator. As the nation's foremost zoologist and a close acquaintance of President Theodore Roosevelt, Hornaday had the full backing of two of the most influential members of the Zoological Society, both prominent figures in the city's establishment. The first, Henry Fairfield Osborn, had played a lead role in the founding of the zoo and was one of the era's most noted paleontologists. He would later achieve fame for naming Tyrannosaurus rex. The second, Madison Grant, was the secretary of the Zoological Society and a high society lawyer from a prominent New York family. Grant had personally helped negotiate the arrangement to take Ota Benga. The clergyman had no success at the zoo and left the park vowing to take up the matter the next day with the city's mayor. But their complaint did catch the attention of the New York Times, whose editors were dismayed that anyone might protest against the display. The editorial said it was absurd to imagine Benga's suffering or humiliation. Pygmies, it continued, are very low in the human scale, and the suggestion that Benga should be in a school instead of a cage ignores the high probability that school would be a place of torture to him. The idea that men are all much alike except as they have had or lacked opportunities for getting an education of books is now far out of date. In the sober opinion of progressive men of science, Benga's exhibition on the hallowed grounds of the New York Zoological Gardens was not mere entertainment, it was educational. They believed Benga belonged to an inferior species. Putting him on display in the zoo promoted the highest ideals of modern civilization. This view had, after all, been espoused by generations of leading intellectuals. Louis Agassiz, the Harvard professor of geology and zoology, who at the time of his death in 1873 was arguably America's most venerated scientist, had insisted for more than 2 decades that blacks were a separate species, a degraded and degenerate race. The dominant force of these ideas, embedded in science, history, government policies, and popular culture, would render Benga's discomfort and humiliation in a monkey house cage incomprehensible to the vast majority of those who witnessed it. Worse yet, Benga left no written account of his own life, and others have since filled the gap with denials, conspiratorial silence, half-truths, and even flagrant deception. By Sunday the 16th of September, a week after his debut, Benga was no longer in the cage, but roamed the park under the watchful eye of park rangers. That day, a record 40,000 people visited the zoo. Wherever Benga went, hordes followed in hot pursuit. The rowdy crowd chased Benga, and when he was cornered, some people poked him in the ribs or tripped him, while others merely laughed at the sight of a frightened pygmy. In self-defense, Benga struck several visitors, and it took 3 men to get him back to the monkey house. Hornaday wrote to Werner on Monday the 17th of September to complain. "I regret to say that Ota Benga has become quite unmanageable," he said. "He has been so fully exploited in the newspapers and so much in the public eye, it is quite inadvisable for us to punish him. For should we do so, we would immediately be accused of cruelty, coercion." Hornaday complained that the boy does quite as he pleases, and it is utterly impossible to control him. He expressed dismay that Benga threatened to bite the keepers whenever they tried to bring him back to the monkey house. Hornaday's star attraction was turning into a liability. "I see no way out of the dilemma," he wrote, "but for him to be taken away." That Friday, a crowd invaded the park and pursued Benga as he walked through the woods. Across the country, newspaper headlines reveled in Benga's plight. The Chicago Tribune joined the banter under the headline, "Tiny Savage Sees New York, Sneers." 3,000 miles away, the Los Angeles Times covered the sensation on Sunday, the 23rd of September, under the headline, "Genuine Pygmy is Ota Benga, can talk with orangutan in New York." Another self-described African explorer, John F. Vane Tempest, published an article in the New York Times disputing the zoo's classification of Benga as a pygmy. Under the headline, "What is Ota Benga?" Vane Tempest said that on the basis of his experience, Benga was actually a southern African Hottentot, and claimed to have conducted a conversation with Benga in the tongue of the Hottentots. According to Vane Tempest, Benga had professed great satisfaction with his captivity. He liked the white man's country where he was treated as a king, had a cozy room, a splendid room in a palace full of monkeys, and enjoyed all the comforts of home except a few wives. This preposterous account was nevertheless presented as a straightforward news story. In this midst of this free-for-all, Reverend Matthew Gilbert of Mount Olivet Baptist Church wrote to the New York Times to report that the spectacle of Benga's captivity had ignited the outrage of African Americans across the U.S. "Only prejudice against the Negro race made such a thing possible in this country," Gilbert said. "I have had occasion to travel abroad, and I am confident that such a thing would not have been tolerated a day in any other civilized country." On the 26th of September, with protests mounting, The city controller's office sent an official to investigate a report that the zookeepers were accepting payments to permit visitors to enter Benga's sleeping quarters. The unnamed inspector visited Benga, whom he found clad in a khaki suit and a soft gray cap. He noted Benga's boyish appearance and described him as an African native who park visitors believed was some sort of a wild man who can understand monkey talk. The tide had begun to turn against Hornaday and the zoo. Heated objections had begun to appear even in the pages of the New York Times. Even worse, Benga was now mounting increased resistance. When handlers tried to return him to the cage, he would bite, kick, and fight his way free. On at least one occasion, he threatened caretakers with a knife he had somehow got hold of. Hornaday was also unsettled by the unruly mobs that chased and taunted Ota Benga. Exasperated, Hornaday attempted to reach Werner, who had inexplicably left the city. "The boy must either leave here immediately or be confined," Hornaday said in a letter to Werner. "Without you, he is a very unruly savage." But as much as he wished to unload Benga, Hornaday refused to release him to Gordon's orphanage unless Gordon promised to return him to Werner upon his return to New York. Gordon would not agree. In the meantime, controversy swirled around the zoo as protests picked up steam around the country. Even white Southerners leapt at the opportunity to mock New Yorkers for the unseemly display, a northern outrage, in the words of one Louisiana newspaper, which added, "Yes, in the sacred city of New York, where almost daily mobs find exciting sport in chasing Negroes through the streets without much being said about it." Finally, on the afternoon of Friday, the 28th of September, 20 days after he first went on display, Benga quietly left the zoo, escorted by the man who had captured him. His departure would be as calm and contained as his debut was frenetic and flamboyant. Apparently no reporters were alerted to witness Benga's farewell. He was taken to the Howard Colored Orphan Asylum in Brooklyn's Weeksville neighborhood, the finally appointed orphanage run by Gordon, in the city's largest and most affluent African-American community. In January 1910, Ota Benga was sent to Lynchburg, Virginia, a city of nearly 30,000 people, with electric streetcars, sumptuous mansions, sycamore trees, and soaring hills. As Gordon had promised when Benga first came into his care, he was sent to the Lynchburg Theological Seminary and College, a school noted for its all-black faculty and staff, which prided itself on its fierce autonomy from the white American Baptist home mission. At the time, many white patrons of black education insisted that blacks only receive an industrial education, but Lynchburg Theological continued to offer its students liberal arts courses. Benga lived in a rambling yellow house across the road from the school with Mary Hayes Allen, the widow of the former president of the seminary, and her 7 children. Benga, usually barefoot, often led a band of neighborhood boys to the forest to teach them the ways of a hunter, how to make bows from vines, hunt wild turkeys and squirrels, and trap small animals. In his scrappy English, Benga often regaled the boys with stories of his adventures hunting elephants. "Big, big," he would say, with outstretched arms, and recounted how he celebrated a kill with a triumphant hunting song. In Benga, they found an open and patient teacher, and a companion who uninhibitedly relived memories of a lost and longed-for life. Benga, in turn, had found a surrogate home and family, and would learn their customs and the contours of their binding blackness. In their sermons and spirituals, he surely recognized a familiar sorrow. Still, they did not know the piercing rupture of captivity, the eternity of alienation that many of their forebears had known, which Benga himself now knew. While they were burdened and disdained in America, it was the land they had tilled and spilled blood on, the land where they created life and buried their dead. For all the rejection, they were home. Benga had only memories, and no one but he could know what form they took. Was his sleep troubled by nightmares of being stalked by mobs or being caged? Was he haunted by visions of murdered loved ones, or of starving, tortured, and chained Congolese? Benga slowly slipped into depression, longing for his home far from reach. His family, he didn't know, had been killed. In 1914, when World War I broke out, a return to the Congo became impossible as passenger ship traffic ended. Benga became depressed as his hopes for a return to his homeland faded. Some nights, beneath a star-speckled sky, the boys recalled, they would watch Benga build a fire and dance and sing around it. They were enraptured as he circled the flames, hopping and singing as if they were not there. They were no older than 10, too young to grasp the poignancy of the ancient ritual. But as he and they grew older, something changed. By 1916, Benga had lost interest in their excursions to hunt and fish, and no longer seemed so eager a friend to the neighborhood children. Many had noticed his darkening disposition, his all-consuming longing to go home. For hours he would sit alone in silence under a tree. Some of his young companions would recall, decades later, a song he used to sing, which he had learned at the theological seminary, "I believe I'll go home. Lordy, won't you help me?" In the late afternoon of the 19th of March, 1916, the boys watched as Benga gathered wood to build a fire in the field. As the fire rose to a brilliant flame, Benga danced around it while chanting and moaning. The boys had seen his ritual before, but this time they detected a profound sorrow. He seemed eerily distant, as vacant as a ghost. That night as they slept, Ota Benga stole into a battered gray shed across the road from his home. Before daybreak, he picked up a gun that he had hidden there and fired a single bullet. He was about 33 years of age at the time of his death. Benga was buried in an unmarked grave in the black section of the Old City Cemetery near his benefactor, Gregory Hayes. At some point, the remains of both men went missing. Local oral history indicates that Hayes and Benga were eventually moved from the old cemetery to White Rock Hill Cemetery, a burial ground that later fell into disrepair. Benga would receive a historic marker in Lynchburg in 2017. Nearly a century after his death, Ota Benga's extraordinary life has inspired countless Rit Freers, artists, and activists in both academia and popular culture. Benga is frequently cited by scholars in studies of the evolutionist roots of racism, exploitation of third world cultures, museum theory, and injustices of the African American experience. He was the basis for fictional characters in the 1998 children's book, The Song of the Malamo, and the 2008 motion picture, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. An international conference on Benga and modern-day African pygmies was held at Lynchburg College in October 2007. In 2020, the Wildlife Conservation Society issued an apology for exhibiting Benga at the Bronx Zoo. In the story of Ota Benga, we see how deeply racism and discrimination being a stain on black people. Even scientists that were supposed to be enlightened believed black people were a degenerate race, far from human. This terrible belief led to Ota Benga's mistreatment and display in a zoo, like he was some kind of animal, and it justified the colonization and exploitation of Africa. It's important to remember Ota Benga's story and the stories of all those who suffered before us. Their pain and struggles show us the dark side of history. As a race, we must stand together and demand the respect we deserve. We can't let the hurtful ideas of the past keep hurting us today. By remembering and honoring those who came before us, we can help create a world where everyone is treated fairly and with respect, no matter their skin color. It's a reminder that we should never let history repeat itself and continue to fight for a better future, where everyone's worth is recognized. As always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos to let more people know the truth about Black history and to hear their own part of the
Everything I'm going to Israel so I kind of ama yako here a video on one way. And I make us subscribe, share this video to go viral. Where you part 1, you're the part 2 beba, na part 3 aba, na part 4 so aba. Intimate part out subscribe, share the video no. Dear Kwane the Abe Biano, also Ube Hurubi, when Yantiasie, Yagu Supreme 1 TV so enter a bay ready. Na Yasasi Ede Emunomano Asanso Abreu, a hide a radisraw, a bepi, enter Yoguswa Yahweh Christ, na soon be, and come a catch or say, peace, shalom, bye bye.